Claws tore through my jacket as I held her down, the rain-soaked ground beneath us slick with pine needles and moonlight. She thrashed with feral strength, amber eyes blazing, teeth bared in primal fury. Each sound she made was half snarl, half breath, animal yet heartbreakingly human. I could feel her pulse hammering beneath my hands, a wild rhythm that spoke of desperation more than rage. "If you're hungry," I whispered through clenched teeth, "you could have just asked." The words made her still for a heartbeat, her gaze flickering with confusion before the instinct returned, fierce and trembling. In that moment, I understood. She wasn't a predator hunting for sport. She was starving. The forest wrapped around us in silence, cloaked beneath the cold light of the moon. My cabin stood deep within the wilderness, a lone structure miles from civilization, where solitude had become my only companion. Nights like this were meant for peace and quiet, for the gentle crackle of fire and the hum of distant wind. But tonight, the woods were restless. I'd seen her before the attack, something graceful moving between the trees, watching me from the shadows with wary curiosity. Her outline shimmered faintly, humanoid but not human, sleek limbs and a long tail that moved with the precision of a creature born to hunt. I had kept my fire low, letting the smell of simmering stew drift through the clearing, pretending I hadn't noticed the pair of glowing eyes stalking the edges of my vision. When she lunged, it wasn't a calculated strike, it was chaos wrapped in hunger. One heartbeat, I was lifting my cup to my lips. The next, she crashed into me with raw, frenzied power. She was lighter than she looked, all wiry muscle and trembling bone, yet her impact drove me backward hard enough to rattle my teeth. We hit the ground, her claws shredding through fabric, stopping just short of flesh. She didn't hiss words, she only growled, guttural sounds slipping through clenched teeth, somewhere between a fox's cry and a woman's gasp. I rolled fast, pinning her wrists to the ground, feeling her muscles coil beneath my grip like a live current ready to strike again. "Easy," I murmured, my voice steady even as my heart thundered. "I don't want to hurt you." Her ears flattened, sharp and angular against her tangled hair. If she heard, it didn't register. She snapped at my shoulder, her breath hot and sharp with the scent of wilderness. Her legs kicked violently, her tail lashing behind her, scattering dirt and leaves. I could have overpowered her easily, but something in her eyes, something frantic and fragile, made me hesitate. This wasn't rage. It was fear, hunger, survival itself. I tightened my hold just enough to keep her from hurting either of us. Beneath me, her breathing came in quick, broken bursts. She wasn't a monster. She was terrified. The smell of stew hung heavy in the night air, meat and herbs and smoke. "You're hungry," I said softly, more statement than question. "That's why you're here." Her body faltered, just slightly, but I felt it. A pause, a flicker of understanding. I took the chance. "If you're hungry," I whispered, "you could have just asked." Her body went rigid. The world stilled except for the fire's soft hiss. Slowly, her golden eyes lifted to meet mine, wide and unblinking, the flames reflected in their surface. "You understand me, don't you?" I breathed. Her claws trembled. For the first time, she didn't fight. I loosened my grip, testing her reaction. "All right," I said quietly. "I'm letting go." And I did. She sprang free instantly, her movements blindingly fast as she crouched several feet away, tail flared and muscles coiled like a drawn bow. She watched me with unblinking intensity, her breathing shallow, her body poised between flight and fury. I didn't reach for her. I turned instead to the fire. The iron pot still bubbled gently, sending the scent of stew curling through the night. Without a word, I ladled a portion into a wooden bowl, the aroma thick and inviting. "Here," I said, setting it down on a flat rock between us. "It's yours. No tricks." The forest fell silent. Even the wind held its breath. I waited, pretending to busy myself with the fire. Behind me came a rustle, a cautious shuffle of leaves. I didn't move. Step by hesitant step, she crept closer, crouched low to the ground, her gaze darting between me and the food. Her tail flicked nervously, her claws grazing the rim of the bowl before she lifted it, sniffed once, then drank. The first sip was hesitant, the second hungrier, the third unstoppable. She devoured it with both hands, her movements frantic but not savage, as though the very act of eating felt foreign. When she finished, she stared at the empty bowl, then at me. Her throat worked once before a hoarse sound escaped her lips. Words, broken but unmistakable. Why give food? Her voice cracked like dry wood. I stared, stunned. She could speak. Because, I said quietly, I'd rather feed you than fight you. Her pupils widened, glowing faintly in the firelight. For the first time, the wildness in her eyes faltered, replaced by something softer, confusion, maybe disbelief. She placed the bowl carefully back on the rock, her claws tapping against the wood as if unsure of the gesture's meaning. Then, without another word, she retreated into the shadows at the edge of the clearing, tail curling tight around her legs. I didn't follow. I simply sat by the fire, stirring what was left of the stew. Every now and then, I felt her gaze from the trees, steady and watchful. I fixed my boot by the firelight, humming a tune I barely remembered. When I finally turned in for the night, she was still out there. I didn't know if she'd leave or return, but I could feel her presence in the dark like a heartbeat against the night. At dawn, I found her again. Not gone. Perched high on a branch above the clearing, knees drawn to her chest, tail looped around her for balance. Her ears drooped slightly, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. She'd stayed all night. When I looked up, she shifted, claws tightening on the bark. Still here, I murmured, mostly to myself. Her tail flicked once in response. I went about my morning as usual, splitting logs, boiling water, checking the traps. I could feel her eyes on me the entire time, curious, silent, unblinking. When I pulled a strip of dried meat from my stores, her attention sharpened instantly. Her pupils dilated, her body leaning forward before she caught herself. I tore the strip in half and tossed one piece onto the ground beneath her tree. She hesitated only a moment before dropping soundlessly, snatching the food, and retreating several paces. She ate quickly, her hands trembling as though afraid it might vanish if she didn't finish fast enough. Watching her stirred something deep inside me, a strange ache I couldn't name. She hadn't just been hungry. She'd been starving, body and soul. When she finished, she looked up again, her voice rough. "Why again?" she asked, the words broken but sincere. I rested the axe on my shoulder and shrugged lightly. "Because I can," I said, "and because you need it." She blinked, her ears twitching as if trying to process that logic. Then she looked away, curling her tail tightly around herself. The rest of the day passed in strange quiet. She shadowed me from a distance, never too close, never too far. When I worked, she watched. When I sat, she perched, always observing, never intruding. By nightfall, I lit the fire again, the glow painting the clearing in soft gold. I set another bowl of stew on the same rock, pretending not to see her silhouette edging closer. This time, she didn't wait as long. She approached, crouched, and began to eat. When the bowl was empty, she didn't leave. She lingered in the circle of firelight, tail curled around her legs, eyes flicking toward me and away again. "You have a name, don't you?" I asked quietly. Her lips parted, closed, then parted again. "Asha," she whispered. I nodded slowly. "Asha, that's a good name." She tilted her head, studying me as though my calm confused her. When I finally turned in, she didn't retreat to the forest. She curled near the edge of the fire, not close enough to touch, but close enough that her presence filled the air. Her tail flicked once toward me before wrapping around herself again. For the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. The next night, she stayed even closer. I'd left the fire burning high, half expecting her to vanish after her hunger was satisfied. But when I stepped outside, Asha was there, crouched at the edge of the clearing. Her eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. She wasn't hunting. She was waiting. I sat by the fire, the warmth cutting through the night chill. She crept nearer, one slow step at a time, until the light caught her face. Her features were delicate, almost human, except for the faint markings that traced along her jaw and the way her ears flicked at every sound. Her tail coiled protectively behind her, the faint silver of its fur glimmering in the firelight. "You always watch me like that?" I asked quietly. She blinked. "Watch?" "Yeah," I said with a faint smile. "Your eyes follow me everywhere." Her ears tilted forward, her expression puzzled but not hostile. "You strange," she said haltingly. "Not fear. Not run." I shrugged. "Told you, you're not scary." Her eyes narrowed. and her voice dropped low. Should fear. I hunt. I kill. I met her gaze steadily. Maybe, but not me. She stared for a long time, trying to understand something I couldn't explain. The fire crackled softly between us. Then she leaned forward, closer, her claws hovering inches from my arm, her breath brushing my sleeve. Fear not, she murmured. Still no, I answered. Her brows knit together, tail twitching sharply. Why? I smiled faintly. Because, I said, you're beautiful. Her ears shot up, eyes widening, her entire body freezing as though struck by lightning. Beautiful, she echoed, the word foreign on her tongue. Yes, I said simply. Fierce, wild, and beautiful. She stepped back half a pace, tail whipping once in flustered confusion. Not beautiful, she muttered. Definitely are. Her cheeks flushed faintly, her tail curling protectively around her legs, as if to hide. I chuckled softly, and she turned her face away, growling low, but I caught the small tremor that wasn't anger. It was embarrassment. She didn't vanish that night. She remained near the fire, silent and still, the tension between us replaced by something quieter, almost fragile. Her tail brushed against my boot once, a fleeting touch like the ghost of trust forming in the dark. I didn't move or speak. I just let her stay. The third night came heavy with fog, the forest whispering in strange voices as mist crept through the trees. Asha was already waiting when I stepped out of the cabin, crouched near the fire pit where embers still glowed faintly. Her tail flicked once, catching the light like liquid silver. I set a pot over the rekindled flames, the familiar scent of stew rising to meet the damp air. She watched every movement, how I stirred the broth, how I tasted it, how I lifted the ladle to pour into 2 bowls instead of 1. No need to wait, I said softly. It's for both of us. Her ears twitched at the word both, as if it was a sound she hadn't learned to trust yet. But she moved closer anyway, graceful despite her hesitation. She ate quickly, though not as frantic as before, pausing sometimes to glance at me between bites. I noticed then how her movements had changed, not as feral, not as defensive. Hunger still lived in her, but now it wasn't for food. It was something quieter, harder to name. When she finished, she set the bowl down carefully, mimicking how I did it. Then, for a long time, she just sat there, amber eyes reflecting firelight, her tail curling lazily across the dirt. You always stare like that? I asked, smiling faintly. She tilted her head, her brow furrowing slightly. Stare. Yeah, I said. Your eyes don't miss much, do they? Her ears angled forward. You strange, she murmured. Not run. Not hide. Because there's no reason to, I replied. You haven't hurt me. She blinked slowly, her gaze lowering to her hands. Her claws traced the rim of the bowl, dragging across the wood in slow, thoughtful lines. Could, she said quietly, almost to herself. If I wanted. Maybe, I said, leaning back on my hands. But you didn't. That silenced her. The fire crackled, throwing sparks into the night air. I watched the play of shadow and light across her face, soft lines and sharp edges, the mark of someone who'd never known what it meant to be gentle. Why? She asked suddenly, her voice rough, uncertain. Why not fear? I met her eyes, steady and calm. Because, I said, you remind me of something I used to be. She blinked, clearly not understanding. Used to be? Alone, I said simply. Hungry for more than food. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Her tail stilled, the tension in her body tightening again. I didn't press further. Some truths weren't ready to be touched. I leaned back, letting the fire's warmth fill the silence. When I glanced at her again, her eyes hadn't left me, but they were softer now, less guarded. By the next morning, she was waiting before I even stepped outside. She crouched by the fire pit again, tracing circles in the ash with one claw. When the cabin door creaked open, she jumped slightly, ears snapping upright. Morning, I said. Her ears flicked, and she shifted awkwardly, her voice barely a whisper. Morning. The words sounded strange from her, stretched by her tongue, like it wasn't meant for her language. I smiled anyway. You're learning. Her expression tightened at that, as though the compliment confused her. I added kindling to the embers, coaxing a small flame. You can help if you want. She hesitated, claws twitching. Then, cautiously, she mirrored my movements, crouching opposite the fire. She copied the way I arranged the sticks, how I shielded the flame with my hand. When the spark caught and the fire grew, her ears perked sharply, eyes wide. You make light, she said slowly. Fire, I corrected gently. Fire, she repeated, testing it. The word came out clumsy but proud, and something in her expression brightened, faint as sunrise through mist. As the day stretched on, she followed me like a shadow. When I chopped wood, she crouched nearby, mimicking the swing of the axe with her claws. When I filled buckets at the stream, she watched, dipping her own hands into the water, fascinated by how it rippled through her fingers. Once, she tried to lift a log herself, grunting softly when it slipped from her grasp. You don't have to, I said. She looked at me sharply. Have to means you don't need to, I explained. She frowned. You do. So I do. That stopped me cold. I stared at her, struck by how simple the words were and how heavy they felt. She wasn't mimicking me anymore. She was trying to belong. You don't have to be me, I said quietly. You can just be you. She looked away, tail curling tight, ears flattening in discomfort. Don't know how, she muttered. That night, she lingered close again. The fire painted gold across her skin, catching the faint shimmer of markings that traced her arms like constellations. When I handed her a bowl, she hesitated before taking it. Together, she said suddenly. Eat together. I nodded, surprised by how gently the word left her mouth. We ate side by side, the silence between us easy, warm. Her eyes kept drifting toward me, her ears twitching with every sound. She wasn't restless tonight. She was curious. After we finished, she didn't move away. Instead, she leaned forward, studying me like she had that first night, though without fear this time. Why call beautiful, she asked. I smiled faintly. Because it's true. She frowned, her tail twitching with agitation. Not true, she said flatly. I countered. You just don't see it yet. Her ears flattened, the faintest color rising in her cheeks. She stood abruptly, tail flicking in frustration. Not beautiful, she snapped. Not soft thing. Didn't say you were soft, I said calmly. Beauty's not weakness. Her jaw clenched, her claws flexing. She circled me once, her movements sharp, testing. Fear now, she demanded. I shook my head. Still no. Why? She barked, her voice cracking with something rawer than anger. I rose slowly, careful not to startle her. Because I see what you are. And what you're not. Her breath hitched. What I am. Hungry, I said softly. Lost. But not broken. Her expression faltered, her tail twitching uncertainly. For a long time, she said nothing. Then she crouched, her voice barely audible. You strange. Maybe, I said. But I think you like strange. Her eyes snapped up to mine, startled, then quickly turned away. She muttered something under her breath in her own tongue, words I didn't understand, but whose tone carried embarrassment like a wound. We sat in silence after that. She leaned closer to the fire, her tail brushing lightly against my leg. It wasn't a touch of threat or dominance. It was accidental, tentative. I didn't move away. She didn't pull back. For the first time since she'd crashed into my life, the night felt peaceful. The storm came the next evening. Clouds rolled in over the forest, and the sky split with thunder that shook the ground. The fire sputtered in the wind, rain pelting down in cold sheets. I pulled my coat tighter, but Asha stood in it as if she belonged to the storm. Her hair whipped wild around her, her eyes gleaming like molten gold beneath the lightning flashes. Asha, I shouted over the roar. She turned to me slowly, her tail snapping behind her like a banner in the wind. Fight me, she said. Her voice was low, hoarse, nearly lost to the rain. What? I asked, stunned. Fight, she repeated. Show fear. Her claws extended, slicing through the air with a hiss. Asha, no, I said, taking a step forward. You don't need to prove. Must see, she snarled, eyes burning. You're not afraid. You should be. Lightning cracked overhead as she lunged. Reflex took over. I caught her wrists, just as I had that first night. Her strength was wild, her body trembling with the effort of holding herself together. Rain streamed down her face, mixing with tears she wouldn't admit to. You don't understand, she cried. I kill. I hunt. I know, I said quietly, my grip unyielding. I've seen it in your eyes. I've felt it in your claws. But that's not all you are. She struggled harder, her breath ragged. Fear me, she shouted, her voice breaking. I can't, I said. Because you're not something to fear. Her body went rigid, trembling violently beneath my hands. Her eyes met mine, raw, desperate, pleading. You lie. No, I said, steady as stone. You're not a monster, Asha. You're alive. You're trying. That's what matters. Something inside her shattered then. She slumped forward, her forehead pressing against my chest. Her claws, once sharp with violence, curled weakly against my coat. Don't know, she whispered. Don't know what to do. I wrapped my arms around her, the storm drenching us both. You don't have to know, I murmured. You just have to stay. Her breath came in short, shaking bursts. Her tail wound tight around my leg again, anchoring her to me. For a long moment, the storm was everything, sound, light, and chaos. But beneath it, her trembling quieted, her heartbeat slowing against mine. If not beast, she said finally, voice barely audible, then what? I brushed her wet hair back, meeting her eyes. Mine, I said softly. She froze, the word echoing through the rain like something sacred. Then, slowly, she leaned into me, her forehead resting against my collarbone, her tail loosening its grip to curl gently instead of constricting. The thunder faded into distant rumble, and for the first time, her breath matched mine. Not in fear, in peace. When dawn came, the storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean. Asha still stood close, rainwater glistening across her skin like scattered jewels. Her eyes were different now, less guarded, more searching. You stay, she asked softly. Always, I said. Her tail brushed against me once more, wrapping loosely around my waist this time. Not possession, not threat, connection. She tilted her head, watching me for a long moment before whispering a single word that made my chest tighten. Together. The days after the storm moved differently, as if the forest itself had learned to breathe again. The rain had washed everything raw and bright, leaving the air crisp with pine and renewal. I spent the mornings rebuilding what the storm had scattered, tightening the cabin shutters, drying firewood, redigging the trench that kept the rain from pooling by the door. Asha stayed close now, not lurking at the tree lean or perched on distant branches, but near enough that her shadow touched mine whenever the sun broke through the clouds. She'd never been still for long. Even now, crouched by the fire pit, she fidgeted constantly, her tail sweeping lazy arcs through the dirt, claws tapping softly against her knees. Every sound in the woods still caught her attention. The snap of a twig, the trill of a bird, the wind pushing through the leaves. Her head would turn sharply, ears twitching, body tense for half a heartbeat before relaxing again. It was instinct, not distrust. She wasn't afraid anymore. She was listening. I caught her watching me more often now, not with suspicion, but with curiosity. When I stacked firewood or stirred the stew, her eyes followed the movements, studying the small rituals of being human. Once, I found her standing by my workbench, turning over an old compass I'd kept from the world I'd left behind. She held it delicately, claws grazing the brass edges as though it were a fragile animal. It points north, I explained. Always north. Her gaze flicked to mine, uncertain. North. I pointed toward the horizon, past the tree lean. Direction helps you find your way when you're lost. She studied it for a long time, her expression unreadable. Then, in a voice soft enough that it nearly vanished into the breeze, she murmured, "Never had north." She set the compass down and turned away, tail curling around her ankles. Something in the way she said it made my chest tighten. That night, she joined me by the fire again, sitting closer than before. The glow painted her features in gold and shadow, the soft lines of her face still edged by the remnants of the huntress she'd once been. "Why you stay here?" she asked after a long silence. "Far from humans. Far from your kind." I took a breath, staring into the flames. "Because peace doesn't live where people do," I said finally. "Out here, I can listen. Think. Heal." She tilted her head, the firelight glinting in her eyes. "Heal from what?" "The noise," I said quietly. "The kind that eats at you from the inside." She didn't answer, but I saw the way her tail stilled, curling tighter around her legs. We both knew what it meant to run from the world. Over the next few days, something began to shift between us. The distance she kept shrank, not all at once but piece by piece, like frost melting under sunlight. She started helping with chores, fetching water, gathering herbs, dragging small branches for kindling. Sometimes she copied my movements almost exactly, as if memorizing the rhythm of my life one motion at a time. Other times, she'd improvise, twisting tasks into something uniquely her own. Once, while I chopped wood, she crouched nearby, using her claws to slice through thinner branches with surprising precision. When she noticed me watching, she huffed softly, tail flicking. "Not neat axe," she said. I smiled. "Guess you're sharper than I am." She blinked, confused by the joke. Then her lips twitched, the smallest hint of a smile trying to form but too shy to stay. It was strange, the way silence changed when she was around. I'd lived with quiet for years, but hers wasn't emptiness. It was alive. When she sat near the fire, even without speaking, her presence filled the air like the pulse of something wild and awake. I found myself talking more about the forest, about the stars, about things that probably meant nothing to her, but made her listen anyway. Sometimes she'd repeat my words back in her broken accent, tasting them like new fruit. Sometimes she'd just hum softly, her tail brushing faintly against my leg as she stared into the flames. On the fourth morning after the storm, I woke to find her inside the cabin for the first time. She was crouched beside the hearth, her claws tracing patterns in the ash, her tail swishing idly. The door had been shut tight the night before. I didn't ask how she'd gotten in. "You're up early," I said, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. Her ears flicked at the sound of my voice. "Fire cold," she said. "Wanted to fix." "You can?" I said with a yawn. "But next time, you can just knock." She frowned. "Knock means let me know you're there first." She tilted her head, repeating it under her breath. "Knock." The word came out soft, almost careful, like she was afraid it might break if said too loudly. She poked a claw at the wooden door, testing it, then looked back at me. Like this. Thump. The sound was barely audible, but her eyes shone with satisfaction. I grinned. Perfect. Later, as the day stretched long, she followed me to the stream. The water glimmered clear and cold, reflecting sunlight through the canopy. She crouched beside me, dipping her fingers into the current, watching it flow between her claws. "You always live here?" she asked after a while. "Yes," I said. "For a long time. Alone. Until you." Her gaze snapped to mine, startled. She looked away quickly, tail curling tight, but the pink rising to her cheeks didn't fade. She didn't speak again until we returned to the cabin. When she finally did, it wasn't a question, it was a confession. "Don't understand," she said. "Why kind?" "Because I can be," I said. "Because no one else was." She turned the words over slowly, like stones in her hands. "No one kind to me," she said at last. "Not since," she trailed off, her voice catching in her throat. The rest of the sentence vanished into the smoke of the fire. I didn't push. I just said softly, "Then let me be the first." That night, she didn't sit across the fire. She sat beside me, not close enough to touch, but close enough that when she breathed, I could feel the faint warmth of it on my arm. Her tail brushed against my boot again, lingering this time, deliberate. The fire burned low, and she stared into it for a long while before whispering, "Lucas." My name had never sounded like that before, strange on her tongue, rough and careful, but honest. "Yes," I said. "Not fear." "Never," I said. Her tail flicked, and the faintest sound escaped her, a low, rumbling note that was neither growl nor sigh. Contentment, I thought. Over the next week, she began to laugh. The first time, it startled us both. I'd been whittling a piece of wood, carving it into something that barely resembled the bird I meant it to. When it slipped from my fingers and tumbled into the dirt, I cursed under my breath. She tilted her head, picked it up, and held it between her claws. "Bird?" she asked, ears twitching in amusement. "That's the idea," I said. Her mouth twitched, and a strange, choked sound escaped her, a short, breathy laugh. She clapped a hand over her mouth instantly, eyes wide in disbelief. I couldn't help smiling. "There it is," I said softly. "Told you you'd laugh someday." She shook her head, muttering, "Not laugh," her cheeks flushing bright. "Definitely laugh," I said, grinning wider. And it was beautiful. She made a low noise, somewhere between a hiss and a groan, and turned away, her tail whipping in flustered circles behind her. From then on, it became easier. She learned words faster. She mimicked the cadence of my sentences. When I called her name, she answered. When I laughed, She frowned first, then smiled, uncertain but genuine. We fell into rhythm, a quiet coexistence that felt fragile and impossible and real all at once. Sometimes, at dusk, she'd follow me to the ridge where the trees opened to the sky. We'd sit in silence, watching the stars bloom one by one. "You're home," she said once, pointing at the constellations. "Up there." I shook my head. "Used to be, maybe. Not anymore." She considered that, tail brushing the ground slowly. "Mine," she said after a long pause. "Gone." "What happened?" Her eyes darkened, and she didn't answer. I didn't ask again. Still, something in her tone haunted me. She wasn't just a wanderer or a creature of instinct. She was someone who had lost everything and forgotten how to ask for it back. And somehow, the universe had dropped her here, in my solitude, as if to remind us both that loneliness wasn't a permanent state. It was a choice waiting to be undone. One night, as the fire crackled low, she crept closer than she ever had. Her shoulder brushed mine, her tail looping lightly around my waist as though testing what I'd allow. Her breath warmed the side of my neck. "Lucas," she whispered. "If I stay," she didn't finish the question. I turned slightly, meeting her eyes. "Then you stay," I said. "That's all that matters." Her lips parted, trembling as though she wanted to say more, but couldn't find the words. Instead, she pressed her forehead against my shoulder. The contact was brief but powerful, her claws curling lightly against the fabric of my shirt. The night hummed with the soft rhythm of her breath, and I realized then, she wasn't trying to tame the wild in her. She was letting me see it. The forest settled into peace after that, days flowing into one another like rivers meeting in quiet rhythm. Asha no longer lingered at the edges of my life. She filled it now, moving through my cabin and clearing as though she'd always belonged. In the mornings, I would wake to find her perched by the open door, tail flicking lazily in the sunrise, her ears twitching to the song of distant birds. When I joined her, she'd glance back with that half-smile she still wasn't entirely sure how to wear. "Morning," she'd whisper, her voice softer now, the growl mostly gone. I'd return it with the same quiet warmth, and we'd start the day together. She learned quickly, faster than I'd thought possible. She'd begun to copy not just my words but the way I moved, the way I thought. When I read aloud from my old, weathered books, she'd sit beside me, claws tracing each line of the page as if the words themselves were something tangible. Her eyes would flicker from symbol to symbol, piecing together meaning. "Story," she'd say, proud of herself. "Yes," I'd answer. "Stories teach us who we are." She would tilt her head at that, ears twitching in thought. "Then, I learned me." I'd smile softly. Maybe. There were still moments when her wildness surfaced, times when the sound of thunder made her hackles rise, or when shadows at the forest edge sent her tail, snapping like a whip. But those instincts didn't scare me anymore. They reminded me of the truth I'd seen in her from the beginning. She was dangerous because the world had taught her to be. She didn't need taming. She needed someone who wouldn't run when the claws came out. One evening, I found her crouched by the stream, her reflection rippling in the current. The water caught her image, wild hair, amber eyes, faint markings that shimmered when the light hit them. She stared at herself for a long time, as if trying to memorize the shape of what she was. "You ever see your reflection before?" I asked, stepping beside her. Her ears flicked, but she didn't look away. "No mirror," she said softly. "Only water. Never stay still." "That's because water moves," I said. "It doesn't hold anything for long." She nodded slowly, her tail curling around her legs. Like me, I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that she was more than motion and instinct, but she looked so fragile in that moment, so uncertain, that I only reached out and let my fingers brush against hers. "Not anymore," I said quietly. She turned to me, and for the first time, I saw her eyes without their usual edge of caution. There was something else there, recognition, maybe even peace. "You see me," she whispered. "Always," I said. The word hung in the air like a promise neither of us had to question. That night, she didn't sit by the fire. She sat beside me on the cot, her tail draped lightly across both of us. She traced the scars on my hands with her claws, careful not to break the skin. "You fight once?" she asked softly. "Long ago," I said. "Not anymore." She tilted her head. "Because peace. Because I learned fighting doesn't make the fear go away. It just feeds it." Her gaze lowered, her voice little more than a whisper. I fought always. Thought that's all I was. Not anymore, I said again, and she smiled faintly, the first smile that didn't vanish too soon. Days passed like this, quietly, steadily. She'd follow me when I went to hunt or fish, keeping her distance but never out of sight. When I split logs, she would help gather the pieces, humming softly under her breath in a tune I'd never heard before. Sometimes she'd stop in the middle of her work and look up at the sky, as if listening to something far away. "What do you hear?" I asked once. She hesitated. "Past," she said finally. "Home, but it far now." Her voice carried no sadness, only acceptance, as if she'd made peace with what she'd lost. When the first frost arrived, we built a thicker fire. The forest was hushed beneath the weight of cold, and smoke rose in thin trails above the clearing. I caught Asha watching the flames, her tail flicking slowly. "You'll get cold out here," I said, handing her my coat. She blinked, confused. "You need." "I have another," I lied. She frowned, but when I draped it around her shoulders, she didn't pull away. The fabric looked strange against her wild frame, but she tugged it tighter, her claws grazing the wool. "Warm," she murmured, a note of wonder in her voice. "That's what it's for," I said. She looked up at me, eyes glowing softly in the firelight. "You give. Always give. Because you're worth it." The words made her still. She stared for a long time, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she reached out, one claw tracing a line down my cheek, featherlight. "No one say that," she whispered. "Not before. Then I'll say it until you believe it." Her breath hitched, and she looked away, hiding her face behind her hair. But her tail, which had been coiled defensively at her side, uncurled and looped once around my wrist, a gesture that said more than words ever could. Winter deepened. Snow began to fall, covering the cabin roof and softening every sound. Asha grew restless in the stillness, pacing near the window, watching flakes drift through the trees. "Cold world," she muttered one night. "But pretty." I nodded. "Most beautiful things are dangerous first." She tilted her head. "Like me?" "Exactly like you," I said. She huffed, pretending to be annoyed, but her tail betrayed her with a slow, sweeping flick. "Still not beautiful," she said firmly. I smiled. "Still are." Her ears twitched in frustration. Human words strange. "Maybe," I said, "but they're all I've got." She fell quiet then, curling up beside the fire. The glow reflected in her eyes as she whispered something low in her own language, words I didn't understand, but the sound carried warmth. "What did you say?" I asked. She hesitated, then answered, "Means thank you." That night, I dreamed of stars, thousands of them, each one reflecting in her eyes. When I woke, she was watching me, crouched beside the cot, her tail brushing faintly against my leg. "Bad dream?" she asked. "No," I said. "Good one." "Then sleep more," she murmured, curling against me before I could reply. Her body was warm, her breathing steady. I didn't sleep again, but I didn't need to. The quiet between us said everything. Weeks passed, and the snow melted. Spring crept back through the trees, cautious and soft. The air smelled of earth and new life. Asha moved lighter now, more confident, her steps less predatory and more curious. She'd begun to hum when she worked, the melody haunting but beautiful. "What song is that?" I asked one morning. "Old one," she said. "Mothers sing before gone." "It's beautiful," I said, and she smiled faintly. "Like you say about me," she teased, and for the first time, she said it with a hint of playfulness instead of denial. I laughed quietly, shaking my head. "Finally learning." "Learning," she repeated, savoring the word. "Feels good." That night, she waited until the fire dimmed before speaking again. "Lucas," she said softly, "if I leave, you follow?" The question hit me harder than I expected. I looked at her, the way her ears twitched nervously, the way her tail tightened like a rope around her legs. "Are you leaving?" I asked. She looked toward the forest, where the wind whispered through the branches. "Maybe. Don't know. Sky calls sometimes. Feel it here." She touched her chest lightly. "But not ready." I reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Then don't go yet," I said. "Stay until you are." She nodded slowly, her claws brushing against my wrist. "You strange," she whispered again. "Strange good." "I'll take it," I said with a grin. She smiled too, small, real, and full of something that felt like hope. Her tail brushed against me once, not an accident, but affection. When she finally spoke again, her voice was soft but sure. You make me not beast. You never were, I said. You just needed someone to see it. The seasons turned, and time slipped quietly by. We found our rhythm again, different, deeper. She learned how to write her name, shaky letters etched into the dirt outside the cabin. She learned how to laugh without hiding it. And I learned that love didn't need to be gentle to be kind. It could be wild, sharp, and still true. One evening, under the same moonlight that had once been witness to her hunger, Asha turned to me with that same fire in her eyes. But this time, it wasn't desperation. It was understanding. You not fear, she said softly. Still no, I answered. Because I see you. Her gaze softened. Then see forever, she whispered. I smiled, drawing her close. Forever, I promised. Her tail wrapped around my waist again, a familiar tether that no longer felt like restraint but belonging. The forest around us hummed with quiet life, the air rich with the scent of spring. And in that moment, beneath the glow of the stars, I realized what she had become. Not the beast the world feared, not the creature that had lunged at me in hunger, but the heart of something new, something neither of us had words for yet. The wind shifted through the trees, carrying the faint echo of her voice as she murmured, "Mine." I looked at her, smiled, and whispered back, "Yours." The night held its breath, and the world felt still again, not empty, not lonely, but whole.